Hi guys, for this report, we're going to tackle the classroom management by understanding learners with special needs with high and low incidence disabilities condition and understanding other students with special needs.
For our objectives is to be able to identify the differences of classroom management process and techniques between typical learners and learner with special needs. Next is to be able to understand the mainstream of typical and atypical learners together in the classroom, and to target the affective characterization of empathy towards learner with special needs. Before we start, let's understand first what are these high and low incidence disabilities conditions. High incidence disabilities conditions are those students that may require special accommodation or teaching styles. According to Friend and Borsuk 2012 says that students with high incidence disabilities have these following characteristics. First is they often hard to distinguish from students without disabilities, especially if non-schooling settings. Second is they often display a combination of academic, behavioral, and social problems, but they meet the same standards as students without disabilities when highly structured interventions are put into place. Here are the examples of high incidence disabilities conditions. First is the autism spectrum disorder. This or the ASD, this condition can be characterized by social skills, repetitive behaviors, and speech and nonverbal communication. Second is the communication disorder. This disorder is an impairment where a child affects their ability to comprehend, detect, or apply language to speech in communicating with others. Intellectual abilities, where a child has a certain limitation when it comes to cognitive functioning and skills, including communication, social, and self-care. Sila pud ng mga slow og development sa ilahang thinking skills, sa ilahang physical. Next is the specific learning disabilities, where a child may struggle when it comes to reading, writing, or calculating. It is also include kanang listening, thinking, speaking, and spelling. Next is the emotional and behavioral disorder. So this disorder is kanang mostly sa mga bata kana maglisod sila o build sa relationship or makikommunicate towards ilahang mga friends or teachers. And sometimes kanang sila tong mga aggressive bitaw kaayo. And pag dili na nimo siya na bantayan or imo lang napasagdaan is pwede siya mag-cause og mas severe nga problem pagdako niya. And next is the physical and sensory disorder. Muna sila kanang may hearing loss or may problem sa eyes. Kana po sa physical is pwede siya injury or mga illness or mga diseases. For our low incidence disabilities conditions is those students who have received special education since birth. They also have a developmental delay with moderate to severe intellectual disabilities, but also those students may need the same attention just like students without disabilities. So we have here some examples: the blindness, low vision, deafness, hard of hearing, deaf blindness, significant developmental delay. Those occur in 3 to 9 years of age who are experiencing significant delay, especially in physical cognition, communication, social and emotional, or adaptive development. Next is the complex health issues. Those are the students who need a support of daily basis, just like a person who have mobility disorders, blindness, Alzheimer's, or dementia. chronic obstructive, Down syndrome, or depression. Next is this serious physical impairment. Those who have cerebral palsy, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, carpal tunnel syndrome, amputations, and spinal cord injuries. We also have a multiple disabilities. Ano siya ka ng more than one disability or disorder na pwede magdungan-dungan. Then last is a certain spectrum of autism.
Typical learners and learners with special needs in classroom management process and technique. First is the typical learner. So what is the typical learner? Typical learners are the students with appropriate social skills that are able to form friendships easily. So they maintain their healthy relationships and they understand their social rules and standards. So they give a generic pictures of progress compared to their same age peers. So some of these are the fast or the gifted learners, the superior or bright learners, the average learners, and the slow learners. Next, so atypical learners. Atypical learners is a student who doesn't learn at the average speed of the classroom and who doesn't respond in the expected way to the conventional curriculum and teaching method. So the atypical students are the students that may have one or more of a variety of disabilities that impedes their learning. So these students are required by the idea to receive an education that involves a least restricted learning. The examples of these are the persons with disabilities like autism and more. The following are the classroom management that the typical learners and the learners with special needs will receive. So first circle is the typical learners. So the typical learners will receive verbal teaching. Verbal teaching because they can understand you easily. Next is the activity expectation because as a normal kid, your activities are well expected. Next is individual schoolwork because you can do your work individually. And next is you can be a little strict to them. Why? Because they can understand once you taught them on what are the limitations they must do. The second circle is the learners with special needs. So for this circle, first is create a support network. It is where you need someone to talk to or to rely on too. Next is the keep things simple because as a learner with special needs, you must keep their things or keep their activities simple so that they can easily finish it or they can easily understand. Third is the partner students with disabilities with students who do not have disabilities. Because as you can see, sometimes learners with special needs need someone they can rely on to or they can ask a question with. Because some students with special needs can't do their work on their own. The third circle, which is in the middle, is where you can manage your learners equally. First is to keep the classroom organized. Next is give students opportunities to success. You can give your students some success by giving them a treat or telling them that they succeed their activity. Next is joint classroom rules. You can make rules for everyone in your classroom. Next is flexible rules, and next is make yourself available so that your students can easily approach you when they needed you. And last is create resources for all your students.
Ways on how to manage typical and atypical learners in the classroom in terms of class climate or classroom climate, behavior, and management. So, first is classroom climate. We should incorporate diversity and use inclusive teaching practices. We should know and characterize what are the needs of our students for them to achieve their need as a students. And we should practice or learn some basic skills for them, for those students nga na ay mga special needs. And next is use icebreaker and collaborative learning. Think of something that can boost energy for our student, kabalumanta, and especially sa mga behavioral disorder, mga emotional, sila tong mga maglisod og focus sa klase. So, it is important nga kanang makaunahuna ta og best way kung aha sila makatuon ug malingaw pod. Then, include diversity and disability statements in your syllabus. So, create a course outline where you can naan na ang activities both sa naay disabilities o walay disabilities, and address incivilities right away. So teach them good moral and good manners, mga moral values and good manners towards sa mga bata or ilahang classmate. So sa mga classmate nga na ay mga disabilities. So we should address this as early as we can para ma-avoid ang mga conflict o para pud mas makatuon ang mga bata nga ma-accept ug mag-respect sa ilahang classmate nga na ay mga special needs. Next is to establish ground rules. This is to give rules, especially kinahanglan gyud is naamoy rules sa inyong classroom. Kay importante na siya if naa sila classmate nga na mga disabilities, kay para pod mas matrain sila ug mas ma-practice ang ilahang good behavior inside and outside sa classroom. And next is check in on classroom climate periodically and make an effort to connect with the students. Just like mga simple actions lang, kanang mag-greet ka sa ilaha habang kasulod sila sa room, kanang maghatag og mga playful nga activities. For our behavior, first, we have to establish a relationship with student. It is very important that we can build a good relationship with our students. So, we need to make an effort where we can give a connection with our student and know them individually. Second is positive learning environment. We want the best for our classroom and for our students. So, we should establishing positive environment that can help for both teachers and students to have a positive learning outcomes. Next is to set expectations. As a teacher, we should let our student know what is our expectation inside the classroom. The more we establish expectations with student about how your classroom operates, the more student will be followed. Fourth is to organize your lessons. It is very important to organize your lessons that can help the student to stay engaged of what you are teaching, and also to design a lesson that will accommodate a structural lesson for individual learners. Next is to focus on strength. It is very important for both teachers and learners to know what and remember what are their strengths. So when a teacher is struggling with that student, she can use that strength to her students. Next is the behavior-specific praise. For many kids, the responses and reaction they get from you for negative behaviors, the negative behavior will give to you. And if the more positive they get from you, the more positive behavior you should see. So instead of focusing on negative side that might be happening, just focus on what are the positive. Greet students at the door. Simple actions like greeting them entering in your room will give a great impact to your students as well too as a teacher. And they will be motivated and boost their energy as a student before starting your lessons or before. Reminder and cues. It is very important to let students know what you want them to do. Just like if you give an activities, you should remind them what to do next or after the activities. Active supervision. It is an effective way in addressing one potential negative behavior. So instead of sitting behind your desk, try to give the time and monitor what are they doing. Just your presence so that you can help them to prevent negative behaviors from happening. Next is to ignore. We may think that ignore is a bad behavior, but it can also an effective strategy when it's done deliberately. So if you have a behavior that is causing problems from a particular student in a classroom, instead of continually in addressing it, try to ignore it, then give the student positive feedback for things and all the reminders. Last is the management. First is to provide teacher candidates with an instructional approaches for classroom management through coursework and guided practice with feedback. We have the instructional materials that students find educationally relevant, a planned sequential order that is logically related to skills, and develop at students' instructional level. Third is to frequent opportunities for students to respond to academic tasks and guided them for practice and immediate feedback and error corrections. Second is the address the challenges facing teacher candidates and new teacher in creating a new positive classroom context. We have to structuring the school and classroom environment, actively supervising student engagement, implementing rules and routines, enacting procedures that encourage appropriate behavior, using behavior reduction strategies, collecting and using data to monitor students' behavior, and modifying classroom management procedures as needed. Last, we have the effective characterization of effective towards learners with special needs. So we will be using the David Krathwohl's process. So Krathwohl process, or the taxonomy of affective domain, is a model that describes how individual process an internalized learning object of an affective or emotional level. So we have here 5 levels of a affective taxonomy. First is the receiving. Being aware of or sensitive to the existence of a certain ideas, materials, or phenomena and being willing to tolerate them. This example includes differentiating, accepting, and listening to. Second is responding. It is a committed in some small measure to the ideas, materials, and phenomena involved by actively responding to them. Examples are complying with, following, recommending, and participating in.
Third is valuing. So valuing is willing to be perceived by others as valuing certain ideas, materials, or phenomena. So valuing actively participate in internalizing an idea by developing your proficiency in supporting and debating. Next is organization. So organization is to relate the value to those already held and bring it into a harmonious and internally consistent philosophy. Examples of this are to discuss, theorize, to formulate, to balance, and to examine. And last is the characterization by value or value set. So this is to act consistently with internalized values. So for example of this is to revise, to require, to avoid, to resist, and to manage, and to resolve. And that concludes our report. Thank you for listening and God bless.